welcome to Discovery Reading. We've got a good topic today. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the scientific method and what that really is, how it works, how scientists design experiments a little bit. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I've got two books for us. I'll read us the titles before we get started while people are logging on. The first one is called Welcome to the Greenhouse. And the next one is called June 29th, 1999. So again, for everybody who's tuning in not live, feel free to put in your questions, feel free to comment them, and we'll get back to you and answer those. We appreciate everybody who's been watching and leaving us questions. But again, yeah, if you're just tuning in, we're going to be talking a little bit about the scientific method today. So let's get started. Okay. So the first book that we're going to be reading is called June 29th, 1999, and it is by David Weiser, and we're reading it with permission from Paper Star Company. Yeah, or actually from Houghton Mifflin Company. I mean, that one, right? The place is Ho-Ho-Kus, New Jersey. The year is 1999. On May 11th, after months of careful research and planning, Holly Evans launches vegetable seedlings into the sky. On May 18th, the young scientist reports on her experiment. Holly intends to study the effects of extraterrestrial conditions on vegetable growth and development. She expects the seedlings to sail off for several weeks before returning to Earth. Her classmates are speechless. The date is June 29th. Shortly after sunrise, a member of the Billings, Montana Moose Lodge, hiking through the Rocky Mountains, makes a startling discovery. Robert Bernabe is in daze when he returns to camp. All he can say for the next several hours is turnips. All over the country, the skies fill with vegetables. Cucumbers circle Kalamazoo, lima beans loom over Levittown, artichokes advance on Anchorage, and parsnips pass by Providence. And broccoli lands with a big bounce in Holly Evans's backyard. In Atumo, Iowa, Tony Kramer emerges from his barn and shouts for joy, "At last, the blue ribbons at the state fair is mine!" By mid-afternoon, all vegetables float safely to the ground. Except for the peppers. For some reason, they need a little help. TV news channels broadcast 24-hour coverage of the airborne vegetal event. Cauliflower carpets California, spinach blankets Greenwich, and arugula covers Ashtabula. Holly is puzzled. Arugula is not part of her experiment. Vegetables become a very big business. Peas from Peoria are shipped down the Mississippi to Mobile in exchange for eggplant. Real estate booms in North Carolina. Avocados bolster Vermont's economy. Potato land is wisely abandoned. The Big Apple is renamed the Big Rutabaga. avocado, and now rutabaga? As the list of vegetables that Holly did not plant grows longer, she concludes that the giant specimens are not the result of her experiment. More curious than disappointed, Holly asks herself, what happened to my vegetables? And whose broccoli is in my backyard? The place is in the ionosphere. On June 29th, the Arcturian star cruiser Alula Borealis was touring its sixth planet in 4 days, and the captain had just pointed to the fjords of Norway off to the port side. In the gallery, an assistant fry cook accidentally jettisoned the entire food supply. As their vegetables drifted toward the small blue planet below, everyone on board had the same thought. Where would their supper come from? Okay, so we got our answer. So let's just talk about what is the scientific method? How do scientists make experiments? Holly in this book does a really good job making an experiment. So really, really simply, the first thing that we have to do is make observations. So that's what she does. She's looking around at her environment. So that would include using our 5 senses. That's one way that we make our observations. And then from there, we might have a question. Her question was, what is going to happen to plants in an extraterrestrial environment? We then have to design our experiment. Her experiment was, she said, I'm going to put these plants on a tray and fly them up into the sky so that they're in those conditions and that they stay. And then we have to collect data, and basically, which means like see what happens. So she saw what happened. All of the vegetables came down from the sky. After we collect that data, we then have to make conclusions and do some analysis. So she decided her conclusion was that those vegetables were not part of her experiment because she didn't plant those plants, so it couldn't have come as a result from her experiment. After we do that, we ask a final question. Her next question was, if it wasn't from my experiment, where did those plants come from? So with every experiment in the whole world, whether it be looking for a vaccine or trying to figure out why an animal behaves a certain way, scientists follow this structure. They have to look, they have to have a question, design a way to answer that question, and then kind of assess if it really worked or if it didn't. Okay, so we're going to look at how scientists do that with animals now with our next book. Okay, this is Welcome to the Greenhouse by Jane Yellen, and it's illustrated by Laura Regan, and we're reading this with permission from Paper Star Publishing Company. And there's a quote in the beginning from Charles Darwin. It says, "The land is one great, wild, untidy, luxuriant hothouse made by nature for herself." Welcome to the greenhouse. Welcome to the hothouse. Welcome to the land of the warm, wet days. There are no doors in the greenhouse, yet strong lianas bar the way. There are no windows in the greenhouse, yet ropey vines frame the views. There are no wooden floors in the greenhouse, only fallen leaves and white rootlets and fungal threads. There are no walls in the greenhouse, only the giant forest trees. There is no roof in the greenhouse, only the canopy of leaves, where the sun and rain poke through narrow slots. Where the slow green-coated sloth. And the quick-fingered capuchin make their slow, quick ways from room to room in the greenhouse. In the dark green, light green, emerald green, bright green, copper green, blue green, ever new greenhouse. But it is not all green in the hot greenhouse. A flash of a blue hummingbird, a splash of golden toad. lunge of waking lizards, a plunge of silverfish. A slide of coral snake through leaves. A glide of butterflies through air, past crimson flowers, past showy orchid bowers. Everywhere color spreads through the hot greenhouse. And this is not a quiet house, not in the day, with a ahoo, ahoo, ahoo of the howler troop welcoming the dawn, and the crunch crunch of longhorn beetles chewing through wood, with the pick buzz hum buzz of 1,000 bees droning over flowers. With the high chitter chitter of the golden line tamarin warning off intruders, with the creak 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 of keel-billed toucans feeding on ripe sweet figs, with the sniff 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 beneath the fig tree where the wild pig picks through the fallen fruit. This is not a quiet house, not even in the night, with a chirr, chirr up of chorusing frogs from limbs and logs, from trees and leaves, from water's edge, from rocky's ledge. Welcome the dark. With the quaw, 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 quo of the boat-billed herons fishing in the river, with the whup, whup, whoosh of the fluttering bats flying through the evening air, with the tweeter-twee, tweeter-twees of the kinkajous calling from the top of the trees. Alert for the soft growl of the ocelot on the prowl for its next meal. This is a loud house, a bright house, a day house, a night house, a wet house, a warm house, a single and swarm house, a monkey house, a tree house, a fish, a bird, and a bee house. Welcome to the greenhouse and the hot summer days. Did you know tropical rainforests only cover 6% of our Earth, but are home to more than 2/3 of all species of plants and animals in our world? You would think they would be taking good care of this greenhouse. However, in the last 100 years, we've cut down over half of the world's rainforests. Today, we are destroying 50 acres a minute, every minute. So a little note about the rainforest. So again, this book is Welcome to the Greenhouse by Jane Yellen and is illustrated by Laura Regan. So that's what this book is. So there's that note in the beginning from Charles Darwin is really interesting about this. So what we do when we look at animals, we don't really experiment on animals because that is not ethical. So what we do is we kind of have to ask a few questions. We make our observations, we look at animals and we say, okay, how are they the same? How are they different? And how can we organize and group them so we can compare them and figure out how they're the same, different, better? What makes them different from other animals that look like this in different parts of the world? And so it's pretty cool that there's a Charles Darwin quote at the beginning of this book, because this was his obsession. He was obsessed with seeing how animals separated, why they lived in certain parts of the world, and how they were the same and different. So we're gonna practice. We're gonna do a comparison like this and kind of do an experiment really fast. So let me get my subjects. Okay, so we're gonna look at these two turtles right here. So this one is the ornate box turtle. We used to have some of these at the museum. So this would have been like Thunder or Houdini. They were ornate box turtles, different kinds Kind of see the patterns. He's pretty small. He's got a cool underside. And then this one is a freshwater slider. Kind of looks like this. If we were going to be doing these comparisons, we could say, okay, well they're both turtles, and we know this because they both have shells, they both have kind of long feet and a long neck, and they can go inside of their shell. Even the pattern on the top of their shells is kind of similar. There's a similar coloration, although the pattern itself is a little bit different. On this one, there's a stripe that goes down the spine, and there's not as much of a swirl as lines. These are straight up swirly, almost circles on here. And we can look at their feet and say, okay, the ornate box turtle kind of has claws, and this one doesn't really. The feet are a little bit bigger. And so that's something else we can say. Another thing that's different about them is they have their completely different size. But overall, their body styles do look pretty similar. So we can look at these two turtles and say, oh, that's interesting. They're kind of similar, they have a lot of differences. Let's look at this next turtle, okay? Okay, this is our hawksbill sea turtle. So following kind of those definitions, it also has a shell, it also has 4 legs and kind of a long neck that can kind of go inside of its shell. Sea turtles don't really put their feet and legs inside of their shells because they swim away. We can look at these feet. There's no claws, don't really get a sense of like bones inside of the flipper either. They don't really walk on land, they're really swimmers. And also the size of this turtle is far bigger than the other two, far bigger than both of them combined. We can look at his mouth. His mouth is completely different. He kind of has a beak. And we don't really see his tail. The pattern on the back of his shell looks completely different. Kind of looks like wood, and it has these layers. It doesn't look as smooth. And the bottom also looks very, very different. So those are kind of some of the comparisons, the experiments that we would do for animals as we say, okay, how can we tell that they're the same, different? Where do they live? Why is their body suited to live where they live? But this is kind of the process that scientists go through every day. They have to go through the scientific method. They gotta make observations, ask a question, design that experiment, and then see what their experiment tells them and make conclusions from there. So that is something that we can do every day in the natural world too. As we walk around, we can compare the flowers, compare grass, compare dogs at the park, and you'll be doing the scientific method. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. Again, if you're watching this not live, feel free to drop your questions and we will type you back and respond to you. So everybody have a good day, and I'll see you guys next Thursday.